Hi, and welcome to today's current news. Today is Wednesday, May 15th, 2024. Today, we will be listening to NPR. The ship that struck the Key Bridge had electrical problems in port, the NTSB says. BBC, Mike Johnson and Vivek Ramaswamy, Republicans flock to court to show they stand with Trump. AP, micropreemie baby who weighed just over 1 pound at birth goes home from Illinois hospital. AP, Palestinians mark 76 years of dispossession as a potentially even larger catastrophe unfolds in Gaza. AP, here's what you can learn from a mom of 3 who runs a half marathon a day. The ship that struck the Key Bridge had electrical problems in the port, the NTSB says. The container ship that struck the Francis Scott Key Bridge had electrical problems the day before it left the port of Baltimore, when it was docked. According to a preliminary report released Tuesday by investigators at the National Transportation Safety Board, the Dolly experienced a blackout during in-port maintenance on March 25th, the NTSB wrote in its report when the crew member mistakenly closed an inline engine exhaust damper. But the NTSB says it's still not clear how the incident relates to what happened early the following morning, when the Dolly lost power twice in minutes before it crashed into one of the bridge's supports. The NTSB is still investigating the electrical configuration following the first in-port blackout and potential impacts on the evening during the accident voyage, the report says. Big construction workers were killed when the Key Bridge collapsed into the Patapsco River, cutting off most maritime traffic into Baltimore's busy port and severing an interstate highway that carried 34,000 vehicles per day. The effort to free the Dolly took a major step toward this week with the controlled demolition of the largest remaining span of the collapsed bridge, which was resting on top of the ship's bow. Crews set off a chain of carefully placed explosives on Monday, letting off plumes of black smoke and a loud boom as the mangled steel trusses crashed into the water below. The next step is to refloat the Dolly so that it can be guided to a nearby terminal at the port for temporary repairs. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has opened a temporary alternate channel, and it is still working to restore a deeper channel for large container ships that typically use the port. State and federal officials have pledged to rebuild the Key Bridge, but they acknowledge it won't be easy or quick. Meanwhile, the legal fight over who will ultimately pay to replace the bridge is underway. The NTSB and the FBI are separately investigating the incident. Their findings could play an important role in determining who is ultimately held liable for the accident. Investigators at the NTSB say that analyzed samples of the fuel that has been burned at the time of the accident, as well as other fuel tanks on the vessel. But those results did not identify any concerns relating to the quality of the fuel, investigators say. The NTSB says it's working with the Maryland Transportation Authority to assess its other bridges and to determine whether pier protection measures need to be improved. The MDTA is studying options for upgrades to the existing protection system around both spans of the Bay Bridge that connect Annapolis to the eastern shore of Maryland, according to the report. The NTSB investigation of all aspects of the accident is ongoing as we determine the probable cause, the report says. Mike Johnson and Vivek Ramaswamy, Republicans flocked to court to show they stand with Trump. When Donald Trump's criminal trial began, his courtroom entourage consisted of a gaggle of lawyers and campaign aides. This week, it started to look more like a preview of July's Republican National Convention. With Michael Cohen, Mr. Trump's former lawyer and pivotal witness for the prosecution, on the stand, the number of prominent Republican office holders in attendance has expanded dramatically. On Tuesday, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, the top Republican in the U.S., met the former president at the courthouse in Manhattan, greeting him with a smile and a nod. Then, while the hush money trial was still ongoing, he gave a brief statement to the press outside. I am disgusted by what is happening here, he said. What is being done to our entire system of justice? Mr. Trump denies 34 counts of falsifying business records related to a hush money payment to porn star Stormy Daniels during the 2016 presidential campaign. New York prosecutors are using a novel legal theory to argue that the alleged cover-up amounts to election interference. Mr. Johnson called the trial a sham and a disgrace, said Cohen, was a proven liar, and claimed that Mr. Trump was being targeted by his political opponents to keep him off the presidential campaign trail as he tries to win back the White House. He even boasted about the size of the crowd at Mr. Trump's Saturday campaign rally in New Jersey. It was a dramatic show of support by the man second in line to the U.S. presidency, and it came just a week after Mr. Johnson survived a challenge to his congressional leadership from within his own party, a challenge that fizzled, in part, because Mr. Trump repeatedly spoke out in his favor. If the mutually beneficial relationship between Mr. Trump and Mr. Johnson was on full display on Tuesday, it was emblematic of how intertwined Mr. Trump's legal fate was become to the fate of the Republican Party during this election year. A parade of U.S. senators and congressmen, top Republican officials, and campaign aides trail in behind the former president each morning as a physical show of political unity. Many have sat behind the former president in the courtroom or stood nodding while he gave his impromptu press statements before and after the day's trial. They have given their own press conferences as well, directly challenging the veracity of the prosecution's witnesses and questioning the political motivations of the presiding judge's family. Those are topics Mr. Trump is prohibited from addressing because of a court-issued gag order for which the former president has been fined 10 times for violating. Further transgressions could land him in jail for contempt of court. Some Republicans, like Senator Tommy Tuberville of Alabama and Rick Scott of Florida, as well as multiple state-level officials, seem content to use their attendance to gain favor with their party's leader and share a portion of the spotlight that the trial has generated. Others may have more immediate interests. This week, several rumored vice presidential contenders have joined Mr. Trump in the courtroom. The VIPs have included Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio, Congressman Byron Donalds of Florida, and former Republican presidential candidates Vivek Ramaswamy and North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum. On Tuesday, the latter three filled the first row of benches behind Mr. Trump in the courtroom, as if waiting their turn to audition for the party's presidential ticket. They were gone by mid-morning, perhaps more interested in the cameras outside the courtroom than the testimony inside it.
The testimony that prosecutors say ties Trump to it all. On his first day on the stand, star witness Michael Cohen tells the court everything required Mr. Trump's sign-off. Cohen spoke about his decade working with his former boss and current foe, and detailed his involvement in hush money payments that were made before the 2016 election. When it came to the Stormy Daniels story, he said Trump fumed in a conversation with him that it was going to be a disaster, a total disaster, and that women were going to hate him. So Cohen said Trump directed him to, quote, just do it, to make the payment to the adult film star, and that it was all about the campaign. In his telling, he ultimately fronted the money because no one else would, and tried to make sure it couldn't be linked back to Trump. Before he wired the $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels' lawyer, he said he got Mr. Trump's sign-off. The court was shown 2 calls from Cohen to Trump that morning. Ultimately, though, this case is about whether Trump falsified business records to disguise the true nature of the payments after he had won the election. Cohen said he was told in front of Trump that the payments would be described as legal services rendered by the company and that Cohen would be given the title of personal attorney to the president. Cohen is back on the stand Tuesday, and soon it will be the defense's turn to ask the questions.
Mr. Trump's criminal trial is uncharted territory, and there is no playbook for how members of a political party should handle their former president and their current presumptive presidential nominee sitting in the criminal dock. In the early days of the trial, few Republicans showed up, but after Senator Scott attended last week, a trickle has turned into a flood, only further blurring the lines between the political and the legal in the New York courthouse. If there was ever any doubt that Mr. Trump's trial would turn into a political spectacle, that question has now been firmly answered. The proceedings are far from over. A micro-preemie baby who weighed just over 1 pound at birth goes home from Illinois hospital. A baby girl who weighed just over 1 pound when she was born prematurely in November has beaten the odds and gone home with her parents after spending her first 6 months at a suburban Chicago hospital. Nyla Brooke Haywood was treated to a send-off party Monday at Silver Cross Hospital in New Lenox, Illinois, attended by family, friends, and hospital staffers before the 6-month-old was taken home by her first-time parents, Nikia and Corey Haywood of Joylet. Nyla was delivered on November 17th at just 22 weeks after her mother, Nikia, was diagnosed with preeclampsia, a dangerous high blood pressure condition. She weighed 1 pound and 1 ounce and was 11 inches long, making her what's known as a micro-preemie. But she left the hospital Monday weighing a healthy 10 pounds and 21 inches long after months of treatment and nurturing in its neonatal intensive care unit. I don't have the words in all honesty. I'm just grateful that she's here. She's healthy and she's doing amazing, Nikia Haywood told WLS-TV on Monday. Palestinians mark 76 years of dispossession as a potentially even larger catastrophe unfolds in Gaza.
كان أملي سنة 48 أن أعود، لكن الأمل اليوم أن أعيش. في فرق بين العودة إلى وطني الأصلي، يبنى وبيارتي وداري اللي أبوي عرقه لليوم موجود فيها، والحمضيات تاعتي والبير تاعي، بير أبوي، والماكينة اللي بتطلع المي من الأرض، أن أعيش فيها. اليوم أنا أتمنى بس أن أعيش سليم بدون عاهة. والله لقمة العيش ما هي موفرة. مش قادر أوفر نفس الأمن والأمان. أنا أعيش في منتهى الخوف. مش قادر أوفر لابني وابن ابن الأمن والأمان لجدي.
Palestinians on Wednesday will mark the 76th year of their mass expulsion from what is now Israel, an event that is at the core of their national struggle. But in many ways, that experience pales in comparison to the calamity now unfolding in Gaza. Palestinians refer to it as the Nakba, Arabic for catastrophe. Some 700,000 Palestinians, a majority for a pre-war population, fled or were driven from their homes before and during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War that followed Israel's establishment. After the war, Israel refused to allow them to return because it would have resulted in Palestinian majority within its borders. Instead, they became a seemingly permanent refugee community that now numbers some 6 million, with most living in slum-like urban refugee camps in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and the Israeli-occupied West Bank. In Gaza, the refugees and their descendants make up around 3/4 of the population. Israel's rejection of what Palestinians say is the right of return has been a core grievance in the conflict and was one of the thorniest issues in peace talks that last collapsed 15 years ago. The refugee camps have always been the main bastions of Palestinian militancy. Now, many Palestinians fear a repeat of their painful history on an even more cataclysmic scale. All across Gaza, Palestinians in recent days have been loading up cars and donkey carts or setting out on foot to already overcrowded tent camps as Israel expands its offensive. The images from several rounds of mass evacuations throughout the 7-month war are strikingly similar to black and white photographs from 1948. Mustafa Al-Ghazar, now 81, still recalls his family's months-long flight from their village in what is now central Israel in the southern city of Rafah when he was 5. At one point, they were bombed from the air. At another, they dug holes under a tree to sleep in for warmth. Al-Ghazar, now a great-grandfather, was forced to flee again over the weekend, this time to a tent in Mawasi, a barren coastal area where more than 450,000 Palestinians live in a squalid camp. He says the conditions are worse than in 1948, when the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees was able to regularly provide food and other essentials. My hope in 1948 was to return, but my hope today is to survive, he said. I live in such fear. He added, breaking into tears, I cannot provide for my children and grandchildren. The war in Gaza was triggered by Hamas' October 7th attack into Israel, has killed over 35,000 Palestinians, according to local health officials, making it by far the deadliest round of fighting in the history of the conflict. The initial Hamas attack killed some 1,200 Israelis. The war has forced some 1.7 million Palestinians, around 3/4 of the territory's population, to flee their home, often multiple times. That is over twice the number that fled before and during the 1948 war. Israel has sealed its border. Egypt has only allowed a small number of Palestinians to leave, in part because it fears a mass influx of Palestinians could generate another long-term refugee crisis. The international community is strongly opposed to any mass expulsion of Palestinians from Gaza, an idea embraced by far-right members of the Israeli government who refer to it as voluntary emigration. Israel has long called for the refugees of 1948 to be absorbed into host countries, saying that the calls for their return are unrealistic and would endanger its existence as a Jewish majority state. It points to the hundreds of thousands of Jews who came to Israel from Arab countries during the turmoil following its establishment, though few of them want to return. Even if Palestinians are not expelled from Gaza en masse, many fear that they will never be able to return to their homes or that the destruction wreaked on the territory will make it impossible to live there. A recent UN estimate said it would take until 2040 to rebuild destroyed homes. The Jewish militias in the 1948 war with armies of neighboring Arab nations were mainly armed with lighter weapons like rifles, machine guns, and mortars. Hundreds of depopulated Palestinian villages were demolished after the war, while Israelis moved into Palestinian homes in Jerusalem, Jaffa, and other cities. In Gaza, Israel has unleashed one of the deadliest and most destructive military campaigns in recent history, at times dropping 2,000-pound bombs on dense residential areas. Entire neighborhoods have been reduced to wastelands of rubble and plowed up roads, many littered with unexploded bombs. The World Bank estimates that $18.5 billion in damage has been inflicted on Gaza, roughly equivalent to the gross domestic product of the entire Palestinian territories in 2022. And that was in January. In the early days of Israel's devastating ground operation in Khan Yunis, and before it went into Rafah. Yara Assi, a Palestinian assistant professor at the University of Central Florida, who has done research on the damage to civilian infrastructure in the war, says it's extremely difficult to imagine the kind of international effort that would be necessary to rebuild Gaza. Even before the war, many Palestinians spoke of an ongoing Nakba, in which Israel gradually forces them out of Gaza. The West Bank and East Jerusalem territories it captured during the 1967 war that the Palestinians want for a future state. They point to home demolitions, settlement construction, and other discriminatory policies that long predate the war, and which major rights groups say amount to apartheid allegations Israel denies. Ozzy and others fear that if another genuine Nakba occurs, it will be in the form of a gradual departure. It won't be called a forcible displacement in some cases. It will be called emigration. It will be called something else, Ozzy said. But in essence, it is people who wish to stay, who have done everything in their power to stay for generations in impossible conditions, finally reaching a point where life is just not livable. Here's what you can learn from a mom of 3 who runs a half marathon a day. Ultra runner Helen Ravar passes through Aileen Waters Country Park in Wrexham during running half a marathon in Wrexham, Wales. Helen Rivar goes through the same routine every night. She checks the weather forecast, lays out her running clothes, puts her running shoes on by the front door, charges her cell phone and flashlight, and sets the alarm for 4 a.m. By 4:15 a.m., she's at the door, rain or shine. I'm just an ordinary person doing extraordinary things, says Rivar, a single mother of 3 who runs her own cleaning business in normal daytime hours and pounds the streets, paths, and trails of North Wales at a time when the rest of the world would typically be asleep. The 43-year-old Rivar took up running in 2020, just before Britain went into lockdown amid the coronavirus pandemic and after being told her ex-husband had died following a mental health battle. 4 years later, she is a world record holder for consecutive half marathons. Her day-on-day tally, featured in the Guinness World Record book, has reached 743 this past weekend, and an inspiration to many, all while raising money for her favorite charities. The runs have become the easy part. It's juggling life that has become the daily ongoing task, says Ravar, who has a 17-year-old and 15-year-old twins. Ravar classed herself as a mediocre runner while at school and was never really into sports. Even now, she doesn't have all the latest running gear, doesn't follow any special diet, just 3 balanced meals a day, and doesn't really care about her speed when she runs. It is more, she says, about building a strong mindset and getting to know her body. I found doing it every day, you just get used to it, she said. Your body and mind. You just get used to the routine, and you turn off that pity party that you had with yourself and get on it. It is just flicking that switch in your head and say, we're doing this. Key for Ravan is running at the same time every day, in her case, before her kids wake up. Fitting some sort of exercise somewhere into the structure of your daily schedule, essentially not giving yourself a chance to mess up, as she puts it. Experts think the same. The key is to find some protected time so it is just part of the routine, said Dr. Michael J. Joyner, an expert on human performance and exercise at the Mayo Clinic of Medicine. This is why many habitual exercises go first thing in the morning. In nearly 2 years of running a half marathon each day, Rayvar says she has only had one injury, and that was when she changed running shoes, which triggered an old glute injury. Otherwise, her advice is fairly simple. Drink plenty of water, have a balanced diet in early nights. Try out magnesium salt baths. They are key, she said. When I don't have them, I notice. Joyner said the main risks of an exercise workload, such as Rayvar's, are orthopedic aches and pains, and more severe things like stress fractures. So you have to build light days into your program, he advises. Usually light days are about less total distance, but they can also be about a less intense effort. Most important for Rayvar is learning to understand your body and staying active, even if that means simply walking down the street on a regular basis. You keep accountable somehow. You'll build up confidence in yourself, and you'll want to push more, she said. Keep accountable somehow. You'll build up confidence in yourself, and you'll want to push more, she said. Form a habit. If you're not comfortable doing it by yourself, join a group. There are loads of Facebook groups, or join a park run. Sign up for a race and commit. When you have a goal, it makes a massive difference. Rayvar's goal is to reach 1,000 consecutive half marathons, which would be some feat considering the previous record for officially timed half marathons was 75. She would get to that milestone in January 24th, 2025, a date she has circled on her calendar. In the meantime, she is just happy to have that nice fuzzy feeling inside. Whenever she goes running, and to be changing people's lives with the money she raises for Cancer Research UK and a local charity in Wrexham, Nightingale House Hospice. Her new hobby is allowing her to see the world, having had trips in recent months to Jordan, Miami, Turkey, and Malta, where she was on national television. I'm definitely riding a wave and getting a lot of support, Rayvar says. It's something you can't buy. It's such a sense of satisfaction. Thank you for joining me today.